Hello, today I'm speaking to Stuart Clark, CEO of Impendium, and we're going to talk about the European Banking Association's common reporting requirements. Now, there's been a certain amount of uncertainty in the industry over the timescales for COREP. Do you think that the timescales are a bit too demanding?
So, common reporting, or COREP, was first laid down, the foundations for that were first laid down way back when, in 2006. By the Central European Banking Supervisory Board. Now that underwent a number of different amendments. I think the first one was back in 2010 and the second one took place in 2011, which pushed the timelines out. Now, unfortunately for the industry, they're currently waiting for a capital requirements regulation to be actually ratified and then actually put into statute. So the current target date of January 1st has also been accepted as non-attainable. Now the FSA has published back in July of this year a new directive that effectively says they would like to start collecting the data from July of 2013. Now there is as yet no defined date in terms of will that really be achievable. And one of the other challenges is you've got other regulations like EMIR, for example, for OTC derivatives, that also come into play in July of 2013. So what we're seeing is a very ambitious, aggressive stance by the regulators, and I think a lot of banks and other financial institutions are really now beginning to realise the enormity of what they've got to do, when they've got to do it by, and we're seeing lots of feedback to the regulators from industry bodies, from individual banks, etc., both publicly and anonymously, flagging up that they are struggling to cope with the rapid change of regulation.
So moving on from the timescales, once COREP is in effect, what types of firms and what parts of the business will be most affected by it?
So with COREP, or common reporting, typically it's going to be, if you look at a typical bank, whatever that is, you're going to be looking at a kind of a finance function, someone that's responsible for the balance sheet reporting. But COREP is going to impact any organisation that is applicable under the FSA's Prudential Sourcebook. Now typically these are banks, they're building societies and investment firms. Conversely, with something like EMIR, separate regulation, that's going to be a separate part of the bank, but the kind of data is all interlinked.
What will probably be the single biggest challenge posed to firms by COREP?
COREP is a real challenge to most organisations and is going to really make them rethink about the way that they do things. Traditionally, banks are very siloed, legacy technology platforms. The whole point of common reporting is to produce a modern XML type data source so that all of the regulators can get parity and consistency of data.
I know it's very hard to get away from XML, isn't it?
Not anymore, and one of the challenges is that you've got lots of legacy platforms, real legacy mainframe platforms now being asked to produce modern technology languages. When you take mergers and acquisitions as well as silo-based approach, it compounds the problem. So a real challenge, and organisations are really being forced now to re-evaluate whether they actually want to do this. Is it their core competency? Is it competitive differentiation to be able to provide this data to the regulator? Do they really want to do that? Does that influence client behaviour, their bottom line? It's non-competitive. Is it something they want to be doing today?
So for a firm that decides that it's worth it for them to comply with COREP, what should they be doing to meet the requirements?
So when we look at legacy, silo, XML, it's going to really force them to evaluate what do they do, how they do it. They've got to look at new approaches. They've got to look at utility organisations that can provide this type of service for them. They've got to look at things like private cloud, time to market. The regulator is going to want more and more and more information. The regulators are slightly on the back foot with what's happened. We can see their response to that. They really want to start to regulate this market. It's not going to stop at COREP. There'll be a COREP 2, there'll be a COREP 3. And organisations can't just build a very bespoke process to meet this requirement, regardless of whether it's XML or not. They're going to need to be much more open in terms of that data consumption, the type of information that's required, not just today, but they've got to start thinking about, what do I need to do tomorrow? What's going to be needed next week? Otherwise, this will become a very, very costly exercise for them, and they need a lot of help.